Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence with psychiatrist Bernard David Beitman, MD. Dr. Beitman is the founder of the Coincidence Project. The project encourages people like you to tell each other coincidence stories. To learn more about Dr. Beitman's work, put Connecting with Coincidence in your web browser. You'll find his book, his Psychology Today blog, and the interviews from this podcast. And now your host, Bernard Beitman, MD.
Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence. I am your host, Dr. Bernie Beitman, MD. Yes, this is CC with BB 2.0. If you wish to support us here at Connecting with Coincidence, please like and subscribe because to increase our numbers and increases our reach. Those of you watching us on YouTube, write us one of your coincidence stories in the comments section. We will reply. Many people ask me, what's the difference between synchronicity and serendipity? Our guest wanted to know something about that himself. After all, I include both of them under the title of Meaningful Coincidences, which, by the way, will be the title of my new book coming out next fall, 2022, Meaningful Coincidences. Both synchronicity and serendipity involve a surprising match between mental events and physical events. Thoughts somehow match an unexpected object in the environment. They differ in their attribution of agency. Who or what did it? Serendipity emphasizes personal responsibility, as illustrated by one of my favorite serendipity phrases, the dog that trots about finds a bone, which means you got to do something to make it happen. That's what it means. You got to move around. Synchronicity emphasizes the mysterious, the greater consciousness, the universe. God is the primary agent, something outside of us. You don't have to choose, rather try to estimate how much you had to do with it and how much mystery there is that had to do with it. Our guest today is Mustafa Wahid, who is an award-winning entrepreneur and managing director of Moosetrex, a global innovation firm. Mustafa is passionate about teaching practical wisdom that can help people make a change in your life fast. Mustafa enjoys teaching as an adjunct professor at the world-renowned Johns Hopkins School of Education, where he encourages innovation and entrepreneurship in Chinese graduate students. He loves serving as Loyola University Maryland's first ever startup executive in residence. That's a skeleton of what you do, Mustafa. Why don't you tell us how you got into it and tell us something more about what you do as a teacher of entrepreneurship?
Sure. Bernie, first, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to talk a little bit more about what I get a chance to do. I like to say that I spend a lot of time bringing ideas to life and teaching people how to do the same. And a lot of that breaks down from my own experiences being an entrepreneur, but specifically, it really started from being first in my family to go to college. And there are a lot of things that I wish I had known. And along the journey of building things, you find a lot of different resources. And, I have the pleasure of teaching at Hopkins. I get a chance to work with some of the best entrepreneurs in the world. And we end up having conversations, whether it's, hey, how do I delegate? How do I manage? How do I coach? How do I raise capital? So I kind of cover the gamut and bring these to life with entrepreneurs. And so it's been fun to pass on knowledge that I wish I had, and also get a chance to work with amazing individuals such as yourself to grow something of their own.
Well, thanks, Mustafa. And we'll get to that. But I think it's fascinating to know that you can teach entrepreneurship. It used to be like, hey, I got this idea. Maybe I'll stumble my way along and see if I can make it happen. And that's kind of the way people did it. I think Facebook happened that way. It's like it didn't have a pathway. They had Harvard. Yeah, it had something to do with it. I don't know what Harvard does, but it makes stuff like that happen. But now you teach it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the basic principles that you try to convey to people about entrepreneurship? Kind of a little intro to entrepreneurship understanding and doing.
Of course. So I actually love that you brought up the example of, let's say, Facebook or even teaching entrepreneurship. There's a lot of people in either camp where it's like it's either nature versus nurture. They think they're just kind of born an entrepreneur. And to that, I say it's good. But if we look at modern science and the field of epigenetics, which is basically it's nature times nurture. Most people, humans, are really resourceful by nature. It depends on where you're searching and where you're looking. So the first thing I help the students do is just kind of tap in to go, what are some examples of resourceful things that you've seen in your life? And that's, I can't wait to get to this in the conversation, but it ties into coincidences and synchronicities. The right thing at the right time shows up. So one of the basic principles we cover, there's a big fancy title for it. It's called effectuation, but we don't need to know the fancy title. What we need to understand is this concept of there are serial entrepreneurs, people who have built more than one company. And there's actually a decision-making process that a researcher studied hundreds of serial entrepreneurs and broke it down into this principle called effectuation. And a simple way to think about it is you start with your means, which the
you start with what?
Your means, basically what you have.
What you have, okay.
Yeah, and the acronym for it's so simple, which is INK, like ink in a pen. So the I stands for identity, who you are. The N stands for network, who you know. And the K stands for knowledge, what you know. All great entrepreneurs, serial entrepreneurs, end up starting with those three things and then work from there and find and grow all of the resources that they have.
Describe that ink again for us slow thinkers.
So INK is an acronym for your means, basically things that you have, so you can start from there. So the I stands for identity, who you are. The N stands for network, or who you know, and the K stands for knowledge, what you know. So in the case of Facebook, right? So you look at identity in terms of Mark Zuckerberg, he had a background. His parents were, I believe his parents were dentists. So he had that if he was a son of dentists, he got a chance to really see his parents build things as well. His dad was a tinkerer. In terms of network, obviously the Harvard network helped. That's why there's the movie. And then the knowledge, he was a fantastic computer programmer. So he built Facebook from having those kind of resources and working in that direction. Now, if you notice, that's also why he didn't build Chobani. He had no experience of working with Greek yogurts. So he didn't go in that direction.
Oh, the yogurt, you referred to yogurt there.
Yep.
Okay,
yep.
I missed that one.
Yeah, so Chobani yogurts are fantastic.
So here, you start with what you bring to it. It's kind of like a past thing, and what you have developed. But that's who you are is kind of a complex thing. I study people. I'm a therapist, so I have to. Who is this? And there's a lot of ways of thinking about it. But what is it from your past that you have that sets you up for the ability to do something? The network is so important and more important these days as we recognize our interconnectedness with each other. And again, all these are synchronicity, serendipity kinds of discussions we are implicitly having here.
Exactly.
Because networks get established by serendipity and you learn stuff by serendipity, and weird stuff happens through synchronicity. So here we are trying to be able to understand where we are both personally and environmentally, because that's where coincidences take place between self and object out there. But then there's something about what you know. So you kind of know yourself, and you kind of know your network. So where is knowledge separate from those two things?
Knowledge can fall under skills that you have. So in this case, Mark Zuckerberg was a programmer. In other cases, you might be a graphic designer. In your case, you have the ability to study people, from a therapist perspective, but also from someone who studies coincidences. So with those knowledge in the sense of, hey, are there tangible skills that are there that we separate from our network? Because in your network, you can have other people who have skills that are complementary or adjacent to yours. So a typical example in entrepreneurship you see is you'll have a founder who they have, let's say, a background in design, but they don't have the knowledge, the coding knowledge to bring their idea to life. And so what they'll do is then they'll go to their network and they'll ask their friends to go, hey, do you know anyone that can help me code my app idea? I designed it, but I don't know how to build it. Similar to, let's say you have an architect that drew out the plans for a house, but then they don't have a builder to be able to put it together. They find one in networks. So the knowledge is separate there.
The thing that strikes me about Zuckerberg and others too, even Jobs, with Apple, is they had all that the ink that you're talking about, their who they were, their network and their knowledge.
Yep.
But then the business part of that, to create these businesses out of that ink, is still an ink blot of Rorschach, ambiguous to me, is how these guys were able to develop the entrepreneurship that you are teaching them from nothing, from not having you around or other people to teach them. How do they make such big businesses out of it?
Well, it's developed over time. It's a skill. It's similar to, how you train to be a physician, how a, professional hockey player trains to be an athlete, how a Formula One race car driver becomes a Formula One race car driver. There's stages to it. So if you look, Steve Jobs having gone to liberal arts college, studying calligraphy, those were all the pieces that helped him then eventually lead up to building Apple. Jeff Bezos at Amazon is another great example. He started young, working on computers. So he had access early on to a computer that throughout the ages, he continued to grow and move forward. In my most recent class, I actually showed an example of the founder of a wonderful language learning app called Duolingo. And he wanted a video game console. He wanted a Nintendo when it first came out when he was 3, and he was in Guatemala. And instead, what his mom did, instead of buying him the Nintendo, she bought him a computer. And from that time, that led him 20 years down the road to go get his PhD in computer science. Well, now he has, so Duolingo is a unicorn. It's a multi-billion-dollar company that's publicly traded, but it started with just his mom's almost coincidental action of buying that computer and giving him a chance to develop over time. And he sought out the network and the knowledge.
I understand the ink part of this.
Yep.
I don't understand the business part of making the ink into a business.
Sure.
That seems to me, don't people go to business school for something like that?
Yeah.
How do you, because I'm looking at this for this podcast, and the Coincidence Project itself is that we got a bunch of good ideas running around here. We got a network. We got knowledge about serendipity, synchronicity. We've got we've got my background, which you kind of referred to, and the background of the people involved. But how do you then jump this ink stuff, which is still separate to me, into like something that becomes a business that can be operative out there?
Sure. So there's a stage of steps that we walk through, and I'd love to. I have a full semester class kind of breaking some of that down, but giving you some of the next steps is then we start looking at different business models. So you start looking and going, okay, well, what's nice is let's take a podcast, for example. It's bringing in an audience. Well, some of the ways to monetize it, you've got advertising, you can sell online courses, and then you can start looking and go, do I know someone who puts online courses together? And then you start looking at models, or what I teach my students is to just do a matrix, right? Start seeing what's out there. What do you like? What do you not like? I'm a big fan of, there's this great product called Masterclass. One of the classes is by the famous designer DVF, or Diane von Furstenberg. And basically when she creates her dresses, she creates something called a mood board, where she just puts everything on for the dress that she thinks is going to be interesting, the pattern, the fabric, the color. In your case, if you're creating an online course that you want to monetize, okay, Bernie, what are some of the courses you like? Why do you like them? And then from there, who's your audience for the course? Then after we kind of look at business model, looking at competitive matrix, then you can start to think about, okay, well, how does this make money? You're selling the course, okay. You start doing some back of the number calculations or back of the envelope calculations. Like, okay, if I sold the course, let's just say it's $50, right? You sell 10 of them a month. right? So in 1 month, you just made $500. Throughout the year, you made 6 grand. Okay.
I think I understand that, and we might be talking about that a little bit more. But you've got to sell the idea somehow. You've got to put whatever idea you have out there so people will pay for it.
That's right.
That's the basic idea,
Yeah.
and you can't keep giving it away free in a way that is. You got to do that too to get it going. So there's a place at which you decide, okay, I'm ready to be paid for what I know. And then you figure, and webinars and classes and courses are ways to do that.
Exactly.
Well,
and they typically call that the freemium business model. So Duolingo, going back to it, the freemium business model, 97% of the people that use their app don't pay for it. So it's free. But the 3% that do pay for their app, and Duolingo does have advertising, between the advertising and the people that pay for their app, they are making anywhere between $150 to $200 million in revenue.
Oh, so that is a very interesting fact, that 3% that you've got right there. Yep. That is the freemium. That is far out in what we call groovy, and that's there. So let's now move to. Hey, what's your name, man? Have I met you before? I don't know. Hey, wait a minute. Why don't you tell us a coincidence? Why don't you tell us a coincidence story, Mustafa?
Sure. And, I love the fact that this is a meta coincidence story. So I get a chance to share my coincidence story with the person who, I had the coincidence with. And so it really started because, it was my first time in the classroom, at least for a long semester-long setting. I'd done keynote presentations, won pitch competitions, but it's different teaching a 16-week, semester at graduate school. It's a lot of fun, excited. But in that journey to, be a great teacher, I was looking for resources. And as a result, one of the resources that I stumbled across was this book called Scenarios. Because I was thinking to myself, what's the best way to teach entrepreneurship? I think the best way is through scenarios, similar to martial art. You practice what you're going to encounter. At the same token, I was reading a book in a completely separate discipline, because one of the things I tell my students is, in order to be a good entrepreneur, you have to lead. Well, in order to lead, you have to know parts of yourself, how you operate. And so I stumbled across this book called Synchronicity. So it was interesting because it was late at night. I just stumbled across this book. I'm typing away on my computer. The bright screen lights are hitting me. And I go, oh, I have to reach out to this person. The book is fantastic. Scroll down to the author and I see this name. And I was like, wait a second. I think I've seen this name before. And I go to my Kindle on my computer. I flip it open to the Scenarios book. And it happens to be the same author. And in that moment, it felt like the world had just shattered. I was like, what are the chances?
The guy who wrote the Scenarios book wrote this book called Synchronicity.
That's exactly right. And so the author...
Are we going to hear his name one of these days?
Yeah, I was about to say. So the author of that book, both Scenarios and Synchronicity, was Joseph Jaworski. And the fascinating part about that too, in a completely separate area, I was considering looking at programs that I was interested in.
And before we keep going here, because the word scenarios has a lot of different meanings to people. Sure. And you referred to it as like practicing in an athletic form. Please describe scenarios, because Jaworski got into that a bit in his Synchronicity book and more later in the Scenarios book. So what, and he's a very, very well-known business consultant.
Yes, he is.
He's big out there, with his book Synchronicity being a big step for him as he learned about synchronicity in getting into the business world and making a huge life transition, including meeting his wife in an airport, which I really like that story. Yeah. I mean, that story, I'm going to say it for a minute. He's in an airport, he sees a woman walk by, and he gets this sense she's the one, and he just runs up to her and says hi, waves himself around, and somehow she doesn't go on the plane, and they get married, and it lasts 20 years. And it's important for people to know that that marriage also ended, that he did a lot for her and she did a lot for him. And then it was over. None of it. Sometimes these things don't last forever, and it's important to keep that in mind. And that one didn't. But that was one of my favorite coincidence stories. Is like you got to be able to act on the moment and to maybe make it happen. It's just it's not going to happen unless you do something. So that's Joseph Jaworski's Synchronicity. But you're going to tell us about what Scenarios is about.
Yep. So Scenarios, and Jaworski's work on Scenarios was fascinating because it's based off of his time at Shell, where it was early on in the process, long before oil companies were thinking about being environmentally friendly. And he was in charge of thinking about environmentally friendly scenarios for Shell, where basically they would game out like option 1, option 2, option 3. And you could do the numbers and you could do the data, but what he realized is he was telling a story. He started crafting a scenario in which people could actually envision themselves in that situation. And as a result, he noticed that the transformation was much easier at a large organization like Shell, just by teaching those scenarios. So
this would be picking up 3 possible scenarios. And I call those expectation videos. It's the way, because I like the term expectation in there, because it's future oriented. These scenarios are future possibilities. And I think that's an important part to get into this. And that's a very big part of making coincidences happen sometimes, is imagining, that is having an intention and then letting it go. But part of it, as in sports, as you were referring to, is imagining, as I did it, running the opening kickoff back for a touchdown, which I did. And it's so much fun to make it happen, but you practice it by imagining it. But here, when you have 3 different scenarios, you get to run through each one of them. As a business person, it's different than on a sports field. And you get to then see how they play out.
Exactly.
And that's what you're trying to be able to say.
That's exactly it, right? And it's tied together. So that's what I love, is a beautiful harmony of a podcast can bring these ideas together from different perspectives and in different ways. And so what was nice is the connection between Scenarios and Synchronicity is that part of those scenarios, to your point, happen in ways that you may not have envisioned, but the end point can be the same. You're like running back the kickoff. You're like, I'm not sure how it's going to happen, but it did happen. And you're like, wow, I just never thought this piece and that piece would have led to this opportunity opening up.
That's such a very, very important point, Mustafa, that you imagine the outcome, but you don't necessarily, and it's not a good thing, to be able to do all the details in between, which some obsessively detailed people will try to start to do, and need to be prevented from doing that. So you have an idea about where you want to go, and some of an idea, like I had to carry the ball. And guys had to block. I had to catch the ball on the kickoff. I mean, there's certain basic things you have to do, but then you leave it alone. And it's some people call it putting the thought form out there. And letting it kind of do something in the psychosphere, our mental atmosphere, that somehow helps make it happen. Who knows how that works?
One of my favorite terms for it comes from animators, which is in-betweening, where effectively animators draw the first frame and then they draw the last frame, and then they figure out what's going to go in between. So you throw the ball here, the ball lands here. Well, eventually you've got to figure out the frames in between.
In-betweening is a wonderful concept, Mustafa. That's wonderful, in-betweening. There's a lot of in-betweening that I'm not going to get into right now, except for to say that that Chopra, in teaching meditation, thinks about being able to get to higher levels of consciousness in the space between thoughts.
I love it. I love it.
It's a different form of in-betweenness. There's something that happens in there. You understand that. So anyway, so you saw these 2 books by the same guy, and surprised to see that Synchronicity and Scenarios were written by Joseph Jaworski,
Yep.
who I had a wonderful chance to interview on one of my earlier shows. He has some great stories too about synchronicity early on in Waco, Texas, but that's another story. So then what happened with you?
Of course. So at the same time, I was reading a book on Zen, because I realized that part of good entrepreneurship is you have to be able to receive the idea or be able to be open enough to take something in. And interestingly enough, in the opening chapter of that Zen book was a reference to synchronicity and Carl Jung. So it was in that moment that I was like, what is going on here? I've got to figure this out. So I pick up, Carl Jung's paper on synchronicity and acausal events. And then before I know it, I'm at Google, I'm searching, hey, is there anyone researching this right now? Because I was like, I need to talk to someone about it. So I type in a name, and as I do, I leave for the day. I'm going to a meeting, right? And I'm going to meet with a friend. I find this incredible researcher. I was like, wow, his tagline on his website at the time was, effectively, and I'm paraphrasing here, but, the first modern researcher since Jung to study coincidences, synchronicity. And I was like, what are the chances? And then I was like, okay, I saw a phone number. Let me call him. I call him, and I remember something along the lines of, I want to say I was kind of confused. Like, I need answers, leave this voice message. And, part of me is expecting him to not pick up. Part of me is, but I was like, all right, let me run to the meeting. So I tell my friend this whole story of all the crazy coincidences that are going on. And I finally get to the part of, I'm like, yeah, and I just left this message with the researcher. And, I had my phone on the table just like this. I say the researcher's name, and boom, it pops up right on my phone. And my friend just looks at me. He's like, did you time that? I was like, no, I did not time that at all whatsoever. He's like, are you going to take it? I was like, yes. Are you okay with that? He's like, absolutely. I can't believe that he called you at the same time. And that researcher was you. And so it was crazy to think that we met through a coincidence. And, what led me to you was a series of different coincidences and things that seem very acausal, things that initially at surface level did not seem to connect whatsoever. But once I started digging in, I was like, wow, these are all connected.
Well, that's a lot of connection. I love the story, and the timing of my calling you when you're talking about me.
Yeah.
Happened when I was just in Virginia Beach. Two people who were part of the Coincidence Project were talking about me, and the phone rings, and it's me. while they're talking about me, and it was they're talking on the phone to each other.
That's right.
And stuff like that happens. And since these are two stories, I think it's happened other times. So you are also a curious kind of guy.
Yep.
How do you understand this? And I'll summarize some of this. Jaworski and Synchronicity and Scenarios. And then the Zen book, Synchronicity, then having to look on Google and coming across me. I don't know where you got my phone number. I don't know how it was out there, but somehow you got that. It's not that evident, and I don't know. That's the part of this that I don't understand. But somehow you got my phone number, and for some reason, I decided to call you. I mean, those are all parts of this, and being able to look at coincidences, and that's one between you and me, is like to try to understand both people's perspective on it. Because a lot of these things, we tend to be just about me.
Right.
Oh, wow, it happened to me. Wow, 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 wow. When there's also other me out there, which happens to be, in this case, one of us, one of the other me's, you, me, you. I'm the other me in this one. So why don't we now go on to what the other me was, me? What happened to me as a result of this phone call to you?
Yeah. I would love to hear that. I'd love to hear, I'm getting a chance for the first time also hear your side of like, what led to you calling back and going through it. So I'm excited.
Well, I
Go ahead.
didn't, there was something compelling about the message you left.
Hmm.
There was something, I'm not urgent exactly, but something that there was like a lot of something in there. And I have to all do this intuitively. This is intuition's a funny thing. You got to hone it with rationality, and just I have so much time and etc. But there was I just like Jaworski seeing this woman walking down one of the corridors at the Chicago O'Hare Airport. She could see. I could feel there was something here, and that's why I called. And the result of that for me was that I shall be released. I was released from a prison of a difficult relationship in my previous radio show podcast thing. It just wasn't working.
Yeah.
And it was really much more arduous than it had to be for me to get out of that. I made it beautifully difficult. It was like I could find so many ways to make it hard not to do it. But with your help, I did it. And now we've got this like 23rd podcast. 23 is my number, one of my lucky numbers. And probably still is in some way my number. You're number 23.
Oh.
And this 23 was a meaning to me change. This is change. I don't know how much of a change it's going to be, but the change is going to be trying to get this podcast that you helped me get going, that you patiently and in your own time too, we have to admit, because where was Mustafa was a lot of what happened again, but you were there enough and at the right time, it turns out, for me to be able to start doing this and to have the Chopra on my show before this one, before I'm talking to you, to get to a place where we could start getting out there. And now I know we have something that's really good. And I've got another book coming out in a year. There's something here that's solidifying that you help make happen. And I thank you again for your participation in this and Joseph Jaworski's indirect angel help in this as well.
Sure. Well, Bernie, thank you. And I'm just as grateful. It's been an honor working with you. And I think in terms of timing, we always ended up being at the right time with each other.
That's why. Where's Mustafa? Yeah. Okay, now he shows up. It was good timing.
Right. It was always good timing. So
it wasn't expected timing, but it was good timing. And it's important for everybody to know that just because you think it should be this way.
Yeah. At times, I've learned, and doing some of the consulting and entrepreneurship work I've gotten a chance to do. What's funny is at times you don't know that the universe is giving you the distance you need. At the time, it doesn't feel that way. But with this, tying back to the story that you shared, it was an honor to be able to help you really understand that you have something here, with all of your studies, all of the work you've done, all of the people you've helped. And that was one of the striking things when we were talking, and I'm really glad I left that voice message, because there was a certain sense of what I like to call flow and urgency behind it. Urgency in the sense of the deep burning desire to find an answer to this, because I know the universe was kind of knocking at my door. And with that, kind of going through it, and I was just blown away on your podcast. Even now, you have incredible guests like Deepak Chopra come on and talk about this, and the way in which they talk about it too. They're like, oh, I just experience this every day. It's almost as if they wake up and drink water like that. And you're like, wait a second, like we're not getting a chance to talk about it at that level. And so to get a chance to kind of help you frame your thoughts around, well, wait a second, media with the tools and modern technology, you're able to create something like this on your own, right? With all the technology and help you have, and it gets a chance to change lives. And I think the beauty of it too is being able to create on your own terms. You have your own creativity, you can create on your terms. It allows for a sense of freedom, because now you can have who you want on your podcast when you want it, share the full story, have the conversation, and do it in a meaningful and intentional way. And I think that's the most important part.
And there's a freedom involved here to expand The previous show, as you indirectly indicated, had a lot of commercials on it. So I had to break every 15 minutes or so, 12 minutes. And now we don't have that. We can get into the flow. And that's probably the best thing that's happened out of all of this. It just in terms of the interviews, they don't have to say, well, we have run to the end of this. I don't have to do that end of this segment. We can just keep going and see where it goes. So it becomes yet more serendipitous to see, or like it's jazz. It's just playing around.
Yep.
You had a burning desire to figure out, to chase this synchronicity thing down because of these several coincidences that you ran into, with the feeling that they gave you that I felt when you called me. And I have a better idea of how you got to me.
Yep.
And when you say burning, it sure sounds like Bernie. And like burning Beitman, as sometimes like, and Beitman is a pretty aggressive, at least in English name, Byte man. So I play with words a lot, but
Sure.
byte also means BYTE, as in computer bits. And in Hebrew, byte, BEIT or BT means home. So byte has three different meanings, quite different. One, the computer, the aggressive, and the just home. So I get to play with that. But when I hear burning Beitman, it's very aggressive. And we get to burning, and through burning, we go to Rumi. And through burning and Rumi, we get to hear how Rumi, and particularly some aspects of Rumi they're going to tell us about, help you not only manifest coincidences, synchronicities, serendipities, but also help you manage them. So could you tell us about Rumi and meaningful coincidences?
Sure. So growing up, I'm Bengali, and I'm a proud Bengali. And what was interesting is growing up all throughout my childhood.
Wait a minute, you're Bengali?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I've never told you I was in Dhaka for 6 weeks.
Small world. My mom's family still lives in Dhaka. So.
Oh man, I just didn't know that. And my favorite curry was from our cook who studied in Calcutta, and it was bamboo curry. And fresh from the marketplace. But we can talk about that another time. So you're talking about your Bengali heritage. I think it's wonderful just to run across that one. So go ahead.
Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting because you grow up I grew up with, my parents both telling me stories of whether it be Rumi or Rabindranath Tagore or Kazi Nazrul Islam.
Tagore, yeah, Tagore.
Yeah. And it's fascinating to go, you don't really realize it, but it's kind of like soil for plants. Like you just grow up and those are nutrients that are in there. And, I was looking for answers because the beautiful thing about coincidences, synchronicity, and it ties into flow is at times it is so different than a normal everyday operating system. Even the language sometimes people use about showing up to work is it's a grind. And, I just got to put my nose to the grindstone. And for me, it felt the opposite. It felt like with the synchronicities that led to you, I was doing what I was meant to do, working on my destiny. And what's really interesting is Rumi, again, came into my life at the right time, almost coincidentally, is a lot of his writing allows me to kind of open myself up more to the world of coincidences and synchronicity, because I think he does this beautiful job of explaining it in ways that you're like, oh yeah, you just have words for things that I'm experiencing, but I didn't have a language for. I'm going to paraphrase one of them that really hits home with me. And each time I experience a coincidence or a synchronicity, I go back to it, which is, an intellectual points to smoke and says there's fire, whereas the mystic sits inside the burning.
And the mystic what?
And the mystic sits inside of the burning.
So there's smoke and there's fire, and the regular person says where there's smoke, there's fire, but the mystic sits in where it's burning.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And for most people, that sounds painful, but when you actually think about it from the perspective of, at times coincidences are meant to help you go in the direction you want to go. And as a result, sometimes there's changes and there's growth that occurs from that. And just like working out a muscle, sometimes you're like, oh, that hurt for a little bit, but then you realize it was actually to help you move in the right direction. And so I go back to that quote a lot because, to your point, you set that intention, you let it go, and it comes back in ways that you can't expect. Part of it is letting go of the conception of it. So there's this wonderful, it ties into Rumi, there's this wonderful.
Would you please describe what it means? I want to hear what you were saying. What do you mean by letting go of the conception of it?
Sure. So it could be even your podcast, right? I mean, part of what we were working through at times is, you were working through the vision inside of how it was to how it can be changed. You're like, well, this is working. But then watching your progression, you were actually letting go of, wait a second, maybe I can let go of this frame and move to a newer frame where I can create how I want to create. And you start to build into that vision. That moment in between where you let go of one idea to almost surrender to the new one, you're like, you know what? I can, have control over my podcast now. I can post when I want to. I can have the freedom that I want. And that, it feels scary. Entrepreneurs go through that all the time. Sometimes you have to let go of what you thought your original company or idea was, and instead follow your users, follow your intuition to go to where you think it's going to be. There's a great Lao Tzu quote that really hits home for this, is I let go of who I think I am, so I might become who I might be. Same idea.
And the scary part of it is this in-between thing. One of the people early on, and this podcast in 2.0 was like, likes to be in between the third and fourth dimension. It's an in-betweener for her. She's in both places. This in-between thing, we tend to have in the Western world to emphasize the thing. It's the thing itself, das Ein. But what we now are getting to more and more is the space between, where it looks like there's nothing.
Yep.
And it's in that emptiness that is the fullness of richness of the potential that's in the emptiness. And that's where nothing is everything. And everything is nothing, which is not such a bad thing. It's like, it's just becomes zero equals the infinity is the way I tend to like to think about that.
Yep. And it goes back to Rumi of, again, paraphrasing one of his quotes. And he goes, why are you acting so small? Right? You are an entire universe in a grain of sand. And just that idea of, wait a second, a universe in a grain of sand and vice versa, you're like, wow, it's that idea of your relationship with the infinite is really, really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm just sitting with that for a bit, to be able to like feel that, that infinite, everything, nothing, which seems so opposite and yet are not. Well, that's wonderful talking with you about this. We're needing to come to a close today, and I just what else do you want to tell us before we wrap this one up?
Sure. Tying it in and putting a pretty bow on it. One is the in-between space, which I think we got a chance to talk about. That void is where you get some of your best ideas. That's where you get a chance to create, because you realize that it is through that freedom that you really have freedom of expression. So that's number one. Right?
How do you explain that a bit, please?
Sure. So when you look, and it reminds me of that, I want to say it's a Zen parable or an anecdote, whatever we call it. It's this idea of you can't keep pouring tea into a full cup, right? It overflows. Part of the void is all of a sudden when you empty your teacup, is you sit with your stillness, you can have really powerful entrepreneurial ideas. There's a great podcaster, Tim Ferriss. He has a great book called Tools of Titans. And if you kind of get under the hood, he basically did a qualitative analysis of just some of the best entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, and founders in the world. And he saw that a common thread through almost all of them was meditation. And so you see that they're trying to kind of, stop the noise for the day to kind of sit and go, wow, okay, hold on. Like in this void of stillness, new ideas can come up. And I also think Peter Drucker, great management thinker, totally underrated, says it best. And again, I'm paraphrasing here, which is, if you only have 5 minutes of time, you can only think about things you're already thinking about. You need larger chunks of time to think about new things, because it gives you that kind of stillness, that's, sputtering, that wandering to all of a sudden stumble onto something. So for those of you that are, on the fence, for those of your audience members that are on the fence about creating, whether it be a creative project, nonprofit, entrepreneurial, even a podcast, take some time and create out of that void of stillness, not where people are telling you should do it, but where, something inside your muse, your genius, whatever you want to call it, the intuition that's moving you forward, give that the space to move forward. A great mentor of mine calls it the do-re. And just, he even gave me a slogan for it. It's let the moose be the moose. So, my nickname's Moose, just run with it. So if anything, I just want to pass that on to all of your audience members. I know that, if they're here, if they're watching this video, there's something that pulled them to this. There's a reason for
it. Especially if they listen to the whole thing, because we just created a tapestry of ideas in this discussion that it's useful to me, hearing what we've just talked about. In a way, this is kind of an open space where we can have two minds kind of just seeing what happens. And based on each what we have. So we're thinking in it. This is a between space, and that's what I really like doing this, talking to different people, and not just about what happened yesterday or something, but ideas that are percolating in their minds and are percolating in mine, and we can see what happens when they come together. And I don't remember what happens. I have to go. I have to go listen to these podcasts, and I say, wow, there's some interesting things in there. Maybe I talk too much. I worry about that sometimes, but that's, a lot of us probably do that, worry too much about the things we don't have to worry about. But there's a lot of good ideas, and you have some, and a lot of people on this show have them. And I think we really have a gem of ideas floating around in here. And somehow in this number 23 that you are, and my need to kind of get it out with Deepak Chopra, kind of giving this a nice little push, getting other people involved with this. The idea of a webinar or a series to sell, or the 3% number, that number is going to stick with me. That this 3% makes the money on this. That's an important number in looking about bell-shaped curves, but it's a different kind of skew on this one. That 3%, it's a different. The bell-shaped curve doesn't fit everything, and certainly doesn't this one. So those are some key ideas I'm going to remember from here. So I want to thank you very much, Mustafa, for hanging out with me this way. So we could record it and look back at it instead of it just passed. We can look at this. I'll look at it, and you probably will sometime, and see what did we talk about here. What can we get out of this in some kind of other stillness? So, thank you very much for being with me today.
Oh, well, Bernie, thank you for having me on. I'm excited, and it's always a pleasure to get a chance to talk to you because you're a wide-ranging intellectual who also can see that, hey, you know what? Sometimes the universe is speaking to you.
Sometimes whatever the universe is, and that's another question some other time. It's a way, that universe thing I get bothered by because it's so big and I can't conceptualize it. Doesn't mean it's not there. It is, but if I got to find out who's talking to me, I want to say, who's talking to me? Where are you? I got to label it a little bit better, but that's just me too. So thanks again, Mustafa.
Of course.
This psychosphere is our mental atmosphere, like a hologram of cosmic consciousness.